Bevin, thank you so much for joining me on Baby Jail Unlocked. I am very excited to talk about anything and everything to do with school, but more importantly, I want people to know that I have the benefit of working with Bevin. So it's more of a personal ask and also an opportunity to be able to dig in deep into your advocacy work and the work that you're doing in the space of stammering, stuttering, and a lot of disability awareness. You do a lot of stuff for mental health as well. So there's lots of stuff that I really want to get into. But for a starting point, I do want to ask about yourself. Just tell me about who you are. What do people need to know about you and what do you value?
Well, I suppose I just want to firstly say thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I've listened to a few of your episodes, and they're just so interesting. So when you asked me to come on, I was like, yeah. Thank you. So myself, I'm not a fan of this question, but basically, I am really passionate about the disability sector. I actually work in the disability sector in a research job, which is quite interesting, and it kind of feeds into that like passion. I'm also a person who stutters. I've been stuttering since I was five. So that's a long time. And that kind of leads into my advocacy work as well. So I have a blog called My Stutter and I, which are where I basically kind of share my experiences as a person who stutters. I write poetry as well around stuttering. So that's kind of my advocacy work. And I basically kind of share the message that like stuttering is okay, and it's okay to talk about it. And if you're a person who doesn't stutter and you're talking with someone who stutters, that's okay. I share tips on how to communicate with people who stutter and kind of what we want out of the, I suppose, communication. What else is that enough?
That is loads. I might draw actually from one point you said, Bevin. You pointed there that your advocacy work talks about, providing practical skills on how to communicate, or the preferences for communications. And I just want to ask, is that coming from experiences of being on the receiving end of negative communication, kind of, when you're younger, maybe, obviously this is an education podcast, maybe potentially school. So what kind of experiences would you have maybe from early life navigating having the stutter, but also being a person that has their own thoughts, has their own views, has their own expressions, just takes a little bit of time. What's that experience for you?
Well, I suppose something I didn't mention when I was talking about myself was that I was a really shy child. Because of my stutter, and especially in school, I never really talked. Just because I was for a number of reasons. Like, I was very lucky in that I was never bullied for my stutter, and my teachers never kind of were nasty about it, but there was a definite kind of awkwardness around it. And I suppose I wasn't really encouraged to speak in school. Now, I wasn't discouraged, but I basically chose not to really talk, and the teachers were like, yeah, that's fine. So yeah, I suppose I I kind of basically my message in my blog and what I do is for young people as well is to kind of show them that it's okay, and regardless of what situation you're in, your voice does matter. And I think like while I suppose like stuttering can really hold a child back in every situation that they're in school, like definitely in school. And I've got one example from first class where I was told that my stutter, or what was it? I was stuttering because I was looking for attention, and I'm like, looking back, I'm like, if I wanted attention, that would be the, like, you know, that would be something I wouldn't want to do.
So who said that? Just clarify. Was it a teacher or someone said to you?
My first class teacher.
Okay. And like that's what I found interesting just from what you've just said is you had teachers, like you clearly said, you kind of excluded yourself, but obviously there's that normalizing of, well, I won't speak so you don't feel uncomfortable, you know, those kind of processes. And I wonder if your teachers or educators at the time, obviously they have their own amount of knowledge and awareness on stuttering, and you know, we've moved on so much since our primary school years in that area, and disability in general. But I wonder if there was a space, say, with you when you were in school, that your teacher could have maybe advocated for you to speak more, to normalize it. Would that have made a difference, or would that have made you put more on a spotlight, or how would that have helped you, or not?
I think it's a really tricky one, because I think like while we have come such a long way in schools, and especially with stuttering and stuff, it's still it can be a really uncomfortable thing to talk about. And I think like and this is something that I again strongly advocate for as well, is that like if a teacher or, you know, an educator came across a child who stutters, I think what the most important thing to do is to talk to them, maybe bring like the parents in, or the like carers in, but like have a conversation with the child and basically be like, what do you want to do? Like, what's the most comfortable thing for you to do? Do you want to participate? Do you want to participate? Sometimes, you know, is like, and this is something that I kind of from my work with the Irish Stammering Association, because I do a lot of work with them and their kind of youth projects and stuff. This, like, one thing that came up, or that has come up in the past, is to basically give a child, you know, a symbol or like a sign that they will want to participate. So for example, like if they have their pencil case out on the desk, that means they do want to participate. Or they, you know, they raise their hand. If they want to, basically, if they want to participate but not talk, they raise their hand a little bit. Or if they do want to talk, they raise their hand like fully. If that makes sense.
Yeah, because I'm just listening to that example, and I think that would have been so helpful for children in general, because you've mentioned shyness, and then if you have any kind of, you know, self-consciousness about anything, I mean, children are either very aware of who they are, or they're not aware, and they're maybe being bullied about something in particular, so they don't want to emphasize that in a classroom in any way, you know, not draw attention to it, so they try and hold themselves back. But that example would be interesting, because all I'm thinking about is how difficult, and how I found it very difficult, reading out loud. Now, reading out loud in class, anyway, I went bright red. I would start sweating. So it wasn't a very comfortable situation for me to be in. It was just being a shy child, like painfully shy, but in a different way. So I'm thinking then for you, like in terms of practice, was there times where you were made to read, or were you made not to read, as in excluded from reading, because there was that idea of you're going to stutter, you're going to take too long, you're going to, you know, delay the class time? Those kind of perceptions that would come along with it, were they evident in your school experience in any way?
I was never, and this is something that I feel very, I don't want to say lucky about, but I'm going to say it, is that like I was never excluded from anything. I was made to read a couple of times, and then I told my mom, and then she went in, and then she talked to the teacher, and then, you know, there was a whole thing. But it wasn't even like she can't read. It was more like she actually doesn't want to, but she can't find the right way to tell you. Yeah. So, but I'm very aware of other people who stutter, who have had experiences like that, who have been like basically made to read, but they really don't want to, and then they're laughed at or teased and stuff like that, even like by teachers. So I, again, was made to read, but I was never excluded from it. And I think now, but I think, yeah, I looking back, I think like making any child read, or making any child do something that they're uncomfortable with, shouldn't have happened. But anyway.
But it's true, because I'm thinking even in my own, just this idea of voice. So my accent has changed throughout my life, because I originally grew up in Crumlin, and I had a very strong Crumlin accent. Then I moved to the country. Now I'm in a hybrid kind of accent. But what I always remember in school, transitioning from Dublin in Crumlin to the countryside, was my accent was very distinct. So that idea of having a different sounding voice really spotlighted me for bullying and for people to make fun of, say, when we read. So I initially remember a situation with me and my sister, and we were reading the word, I think it was cooking, but at the time, because of our accent, we said cooking. And that was an opportunity for other peers who didn't hear this difference before. Was in a very small primary school where a lot of the families would have been either related or knew of each other. So we were in a very like tight-knit community. So I'd imagine there would be people that are having those experiences in school where having any kind of difference in voice, whether it's fluency, as you've been highlighting, or sound, can really stigmatize a child, not necessarily as a result of, you know, a school system or teachers, as in they can be wonderful and inclusive, but sometimes it can actually just be a human aspect, you know, the human aspect of recognizing difference and not knowing what to do about it.
Definitely. And I think this kind of goes back to talking to like the child who stutters, or the parent who stutters. I think a wider classroom conversation about voice difference would really benefit. Like a classroom, even just a very simple one of like, look, we all look different, we all are differently shaped, or, you know, differently shaped, or we're all, you know, we're all from the, like, we're not all from the same place. You know, everyone's different, and I think like voices are the same. Like no one talks the exact same, and I think like, yes, like fluency or disfluency is a bigger part of that, but I think just having a general conversation with the class, being like, you know, everyone's different.
And it's, I really want to draw on that. It's the fluency aspect, because I had never actually heard of fluency in the way that you've talked about in your advocacy work, which I found very interesting, because it's something that you think, why isn't it normalized to talk about the idea of fluency in communication? I think it's because it's always assumed And that's where your awareness is really drawing out. It's that idea, well, it's assumed because we're normalizing certain ways of recognizing what a voice is. So for children that, you know, are consulted in research or asked their opinion on, you know, their class routine, for example, it's assumed that they're going to verbally respond, but not necessarily. So can you talk to me a little bit more about your view of like what fluency is or what it means to you, and for audiences like me who may necessarily have never actually seen or heard fluency in this be put towards in this way?
Yeah, I think like one thing that jumps out at me, and I think like you don't need to be a fluent speaker to communicate. And I think like, you know, for example, just looking at like drama classes or like workshops, you know, the way like, you know, say a drama teacher would take a class for like, you know, an hour or so, and they play games and they do all that. It's like in my experience with drama kind of sessions was that like our articulation was really important, and the like tone of your voice was really important, and then like fluency comes in there. And you know, you need to speak in a clear way, and you need to like make sure your like peers understand you. And I think like it's such a nuanced thing, because going back to what I said, like fluency doesn't mean like, basically it's kind of like if you're a fluent speaker, you're assumed to be more intelligent or more confident or more, you know, like a better student, I guess. And I think like fluency, I think that's what people assume. And I think like fluency doesn't automatically mean you're more intelligent, doesn't mean you're more confident. You're not intelligent. So fluency doesn't mean you're not intelligent. Fluency doesn't mean you're not confident. And I think that's kind of what I view fluency as, is that it's this nuanced thing that just isn't, I suppose, addressed, or like is fluency like no one ever talks about like is fluency either. And I think like, yeah, that's my thought on that.
Yeah, because it's funny how you described it. It's like the way the assumptions would be like fluency is assumed that you're, as you said, intelligent, or it's a reflection of, you know, your value as a person. So particularly like I'm thinking of like school children, you know, that the idea of voice in general for children is, you know, it's very much hindered or silenced or disregarded, taken for granted. So I can imagine then being a child with the stutter is literally something that would make people feel even more of a reason to go, no, we won't listen, or we won't talk to her, or, you know, in terms of not necessarily your experience, but obviously this idea of being aware of the diverse voices that can exist, whether it's having a different accent or taking a different, I mean, the opposite as well, Bevin. We haven't touched on it, but when I get really nervous, I speak really quickly, too quickly to comprehend at times. And I wonder, is that also the kind of the range of fluency, as in fluency can mean so many different things. It can mean, as you said, it can mean like, it's interesting to hear how you describe it, that fluency is associated with clear communication, but you're very clear on your views, what you believe in, how you express them. So for teachers and educators that are working with, say, children or students, even in college, I mean, you've touched a little bit on college and university as well. how would you support an educator or a teacher that wants to do everything perfectly but doesn't know where to start if they want to know more about stuttering? As in, they've no knowledge about it, they've no idea of where to get support or resources. Is there anywhere in particular that, you know, educators or teachers can seek out information, or organizations that might be able to support in general to do with stuttering and stammering?
Well, going back to when I was saying, I work with the Irish Stammering Association. That's a brilliant organization. It's there's so many like resources on their website for like schools and colleges and parents and kids. So there, yeah, so that would be an organization I'd recommend over in our Ireland. There's also the British organization as well. They're called Stama, so it's STAMMA. And again, if you go on their website, they've got loads of stuff on there for, you know, schools, parents, and kids. But I suppose like one thing, and not to like promote my blog, but like I'm gonna promote
it all over this episode.
is that like not even like not only my blog, but there's like loads of like podcasts out there. Like we the Irish Stammering Association made a podcast, so that's on their website. But yeah, so my blog has got, it's, I suppose my blog is slightly different because it's more of like a personal experience one. Trying to think now, there's probably, what else is there? That's all I can think of for the moment. But
if we think of any more, we'll link it into the episode anyway, so that's fine.
Yeah.
And then I also wanted to touch on this idea of voice in terms of just life. You know, so you've touched on it obviously for school environments and, you know, the practicalities of dealing with schools, and also a little bit to do with work. But just in life, you know, you've become essentially a spokesperson that's advocating for fluency and recognizing it in different ways, diverse ways, and then creating an awful lot of awareness around mental health and the idea of, well, look, you need to work with your voice and accept your voice as it is. And, you know, trying to almost avoid that external stigma, you know, that is around the different diversity of different people. So for people as well that may be listening to this, or even essentially young people, which is I'm really trying to harp in here, is you may have people listening that are in a similar situation that you were in. And they may be looking at this episode thinking, wow, she's got the confidence, she knows what she wants, she knows where she's at. But I know from talking to you, working with you and befriending you, that's a long process. So can you talk a little bit about that process, kind of where you started off in terms of recognizing you had a stammer and a stutter and how people interact differently in different ways, and then how that affected your confidence, and then what you've done to then get to where you are today?
Yeah, so actually my mom stutters as well. So that's I recognize stuttering in my mom more than or before I recognized it in myself. So when I was like 5, I was like, well, you talk differently, and I also talk differently. So that's kind of where my stutter comes from. And just for a bit of information, a lot of stuttering is genetic. So it's not for definite, but if someone stammers, more than likely there's a family member who also stammers. So that's where they get that from. But yeah, like I said, I was a very shy child, even with the support of my mom. Yeah, I didn't really have any confidence when I was younger. didn't talk a lot, never really shared my opinions or my ideas, and that kind of like what's the word, that kind of continued on like through primary school and then secondary school, and it was really only when I got to college that I had like a light bulb moment of, you know, I can't do this anymore. I can't just like pretend, or I suppose it was kind of like I need to live. Basically, I need to live my life, and I feel like I missed out on a lot when I was younger. I didn't really put myself like forward for anything, or like, you know, it was I had a very quiet childhood, very quiet teenage part of my life, and I got to college and I was like, yeah, I need to start living my life. And it took a few years for me to get to that point, but it was kind of like an epiphany. And I think, while yes, I'm living my life now for my present self, I'm also living it for my younger self, for the child that didn't get to, or I suppose for the child who felt like she couldn't do the things, or couldn't, you know, put herself forward for things.
I want to ask about that because I loved that post on your blog where you wrote a letter to your younger self. Can you just talk a little bit more about that, where that came from, and, you know, a little bit of context about what you talked about and where all that kind of discussion came from?
Yeah, so I suppose when I was kind of setting up my blog, I was trying to figure out what to post and what to kind of write about, and I never want to post for the sake of it. And it kind of got me to thinking, I'm like, well, what would my younger self wanna know, or what would I like, what would kind of help my younger self. And I suppose like it would kind of be like, everything works out okay, and like you do end up being like, you know, you do end up doing things that you want to do, and you do end up having experiences that, you know, I know right now you might not feel like you're going to have them, but you do have them. And I think inner child work is so important when you're an adult, and basically like talking to, like, I've got it actually. Sorry, I'm looking over there because my mirror is over there, and I've got like a little picture of myself from when I was like four. And it's basically to be like, everything you say to yourself now, you're saying to your childhood self. And I suppose the letter to my younger self came from that, of like, well, you know, like I said, it was kind of like, well, what does my child self need to hear from my older self? And I think like, if it's the one I think you're talking about, it was kind of like, I never gave out to them for feeling or for reacting or behaving in a certain way when I was stuttering. It was more like, you know, I get why you behave like that, because of the stigma and the, you know, the kind of not feeling like a normal person, and wanting to kind of I suppose like I let society control me in a way, because they kept me not wanting to like talk, and that was okay. But now looking back, you know, I'm not doing that anymore, because I know that's not a good thing.
It's funny because you just said, and that was okay, and I'm there going, and it wasn't. I suppose it's you recognizing that you're okay with it now, but at any point, no one should feel like their voice is being silenced because people don't have the time to listen, or people don't have the attention to listen, or just the interest to listen. There's so much around, recognizing voice, and especially for children, like you've talked so openly about your younger self. I'm curious to know, was your younger self, when you were younger in school or just in life in general, did you ever feel like you had to change your voice or how you spoke?
Yeah, and I think like going back, because my mom, and she wouldn't mind me like talking about this, because she's very like open and woo at it, as well. But my mom was a covert stammerer, which meant like she tried really hard not to stammer, and like, this is going to sound really weird, but like, because of that, she didn't actually stammer. She'd like switched her words around, or she kind of like, she waited until the right moment to speak when she knew she wasn't going to stammer. And I think like I tried to do that. I tried to be a covert stammerer, but for some reason my body and my I suppose my mind and my and my and my and my voice didn't allow me to do that. But I did. Yeah, I did change, or try to change the way I spoke, in the sense that like I like whispered a lot of times, or because it's weird, like stammering, you rarely stammer when you whisper. You rarely stammer when you sing. There's a couple of other things, but so I whispered a lot, and I kind of used a lot of like filler words. So like, all the little, what they call like like like
linking
that.
words, like
Yeah.
linking words, or like filler words just make sense. So like,
Yeah.
I can't imagine. Well, I can imagine, because I would have done something similar, where you're trying to change how you speak so that everyone can accept you.
Yeah.
How did that make you feel when you were a child, and then how does it feel looking back now with where you are now?
I think it's kind of strange looking back now, because like when I was a child and I was stammering, and then I kind of struggled not to stammer, or kind of tried not to stammer, and I didn't. But I like that being said, I would never kind of share my opinions on something, or I would share a different opinion, because that was the opinion I could say. I felt, and then as a child, when I did that, I felt very I felt like I accomplished something. I felt like I accomplished being fluent. And I think like it makes me sad thinking about it, because I'm like, obviously you want to, when you're a child, you want to share your opinions, you want to share your ideas. And I suppose now I look at it very differently. It's like, now I'm not going to say I don't have days or moments where I struggle and I kind of go back to my old ways slightly. But I think like my idea of accomplishment is so different. It's like now the idea of accomplishment is when I do share an opinion or I do share an idea, regardless of how it comes out, you know. And I think it got like, and this is again another kind of bit of information or kind of another fact about stammering, is that when you try not to stammer, you're more than likely going to. And when you, I suppose, not so much try to stammer, but if you let the stammer kind of flow in and out the way it wants to, usually you don't stammer as much as you think you will.
And so, and it's funny because I'm really conscious of how we're talking about you and the stammer. And it's almost like it's like a separate part of you. But as we know, it's part of you. And was that a journey as well, learning how to associate yourself as in someone and the stammer as in a separate part of you, to now seeing it as it's all of you, you know, it's part of you and it's not you, you know, it's not the defining characteristic of you. Like, was there a process for you where you were associating, firstly accepting, but also then moving to a point of, you know, embracing, you know, how do you go from accepting to embracing? And, you know, for people that may be thinking about either working with children that have a different, whether it's different accent, as I said, stammer, different way of communicating. It may even be English isn't a first language, you know, anything like that in terms of diverse voices. How you go from, you know, as a child, as the person on the receiving end that, you know, wants to feel that accomplishment, but then want to feel like, no, this is my superpower, because that's how you advocate for in your blog. It's your superpower. It's what's giving you your advocacy work, and you're able to create awareness for other people.
Yeah, I think, and again, going back, like I was a very lucky child in that I got involved because of my mom, because she stammered. I got involved with like kind of stammering or youth groups with kids who stammer. So I think like being around other kids who stammered made them like, there was a massive impact, and I was like, all right, I'm not the only one. You know, I can talk about it. It's okay. Like, you know, and I think that like having that sense of community from a young age is, you know, really helped me. And I think it, from what I've read and kind of like what I've been told, is that it does help other kids, is the feeling that you're not alone. So I suppose that was the kind of like accepting part of it. I didn't really embrace it outside of those kind of group sessions or workshops, because it was like, you know, this is my safe space and I'm allowed to stammer in this space. But when I leave, I'm not going to be able to stammer, or I'm not going to, you know, be able to stammer without being looked at differently or looked at in a weird way. And I think, like, I know it sounds really like a really cliche thing, but like, if you keep kind of pushing yourself out of your comfort zone and kind of, you know, not like big jumps, but like every so often just kind of doing a thing that like scares you. So like calling someone on the phone, that was something I was like I was terrified of. And so bit by bit I kind of worked up to that. And I think that's how you learn to embrace the way you talk, because, and this is something that I've kind of been thinking about, or kind of I've had conversations about, is that like, you're like, in order, and sorry, let me get this quote. It's like, in order to stutter or to stammer, you need to use your voice, if that makes any sense. So like people think that so the world thinks that people who stammer or people with kind of speech differences or disfluency don't have a voice, when in fact they have to, because that's how they're disfluent, or that's how they speak differently. I'm not sure if that makes sense.
That makes loads of sense. I nearly wanted to say it again. So you're basically saying it makes sense for difference in voice. So stammer, stuttering, accent, broken English, broken language in general, anything, you know, but particularly as you're saying with stuttering, you can't stutter when you're silent. So I nearly wanted to just kind of go in a little bit deeper about that for audiences, just to really emphasize that point. I love that point. It's the idea is having a diverse voice is great, because when you use it, you emphasize that there's difference, and then you normalize that difference. And if you don't, you're normalizing the same. So please go into that more, because that's a wonderful point.
But it's also like you emphasize that there is difference. You emphasize that there is, you know, not everyone's the same, but you emphasize that you do, like you can talk, that you can speak. Like if you couldn't, like if you couldn't talk, you wouldn't talk, or you would struggle to. Whereas like people with speech differences, it's like in order to have a speech difference, you need to be like, you need to like talk and like share your opinions and ideas and stuff. And I think like, again, something else that kind of leads into that is that like stammering, and probably a couple of other things, but stammering definitely is the only thing that can create like time, like time and space. Like stammering, like the world kind of in a way stops a little bit when you're stammering or listening to someone who stammers. And I think like that's a really cool thought of like it creates time and creates space. And while like silence also does that, like silence creates, or like, yeah, like silence, like waiting for someone to talk creates time and space. But it's like, yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure where to go with that thought, but like,
No, like you're 100%, because it's that you're actually making the point that by being on the receiving end of someone stammering or stuttering, it does force you to be more present. It forces you to be more of an active listener. And it shouldn't be, you know, my point is it should be the norm. But exactly that, we're too quick to move on to the next conversation or move on to the next scenario, move on to the next situation, that we do lose those diverse voices that are trying to say something. You know, I'm just thinking of the rushed child, or, you know, the person who's trying to collect their thoughts but doesn't get a second to get them together until someone, you know, turns away and their attention is gone. It's very much making the point that diverse voices forces us into that discomfort of being present, because we're so rushed that we seem to just not have the time to listen to anybody anymore. We're not being meaningful with our time in terms of listening to the child that needs to tell you something about their play, because maybe they're saying, oh, look, I don't have time, I need to do the attendance book, or I need to do this, and push moving along. That you're making an amazing point that with your stutter, you're able to actually say, but time will be slower when you engage with me because you're going to take the time to hear what I say.
Yeah.
And I just think that's a wonderful just piece of information anyway for educators, for humans to be able to say, just take the time to listen, no matter who that person is, child, adult, etc. I think that's a wonderful point to be able to draw on.
And I think like kids or children like can struggle to ask for that sometimes. I think that's what I was saying when you're asking like what can like teachers or educators do, is just have like a general conversation with the like child or the parent, or but both is probably like the best thing, and just be like, what do you need from me? Like, do you need like like obviously this is the best thing to do, but like I'm gonna give you my full attention when you're speaking, because I know it takes you a little bit longer to say something, and you need my full attention because that's what you need. And I know like every child should get that, and every child should get that full attention, but I think as a person who stammers and as a child who stammers, I think, or used to be a child who stammers, is that I think like, being given the space to basically be like, right, well, this is what I want. This is what I want. This is what I need. Because like and I suppose when I was a child, someone finishing my sentences used to drive me crazy. I was like, just wait 2 seconds and I'll say it. And it was just so, and because most of the time it didn't actually know what I was going to say. And it's like, that's the thing that drives me crazy. It's like, just wait like 2 seconds. Anyway.
Can I actually add on to that, Bevin? What are the pet peeves? So that's one pet peeve, but just for people to be aware, like pet peeves for like, okay, finishing sentences. I'm horrendous for interrupting people. My partner will scream that from the top of the roof. But it's funny, in different environments with different people, I have the full attention for them. You have all the space. So my poor partner isn't benefiting from that as I'm interrupting everything he says. But you know what I mean? I think that's a really interesting pet peeve to be aware of, because people mightn't be aware that what they're doing is wrong. They might think that they're helping. I think that's really interesting, because it could be, again, the adult that's thinking, oh, I know what the child is going to say, so I'm going to finish their sentence so they can get there quicker, not realizing, not in a negative intention manner. They may not just realize that they're actually causing more frustration in that child. So what kind of pet peeves exist that like would people benefit from actually being aware of?
I think another thing, and this again used to drive me crazy, was that, say, when I was a child, or even like now, it doesn't really happen that often now, but people used to tell me to like, it's okay, slow down, take a breath, take a breath, stop, start again. Like that used to drive me crazy, because I was like, I know what I'm doing. As a child, you're like, I know how to talk. It just takes me like, a little bit longer. So that's a pet peeve, and that's something that a lot of people who stammer don't want and don't like, is the kind of like, basically just wait and be patient and not talk, not talk while they're like, sorry, if you're a person who doesn't stammer, don't talk over the person who does stammer, is basically the thing. So yeah, finishing sentences, kind of like encouraging, like words of encouragement, I suppose you could say, would be a pet peeve. That kind of thing of like, it's okay, I take a breath, and then it's like kind of all that. It's like, that's not helpful. I think one, I suppose this is a unique one, or kind of a different one, is that like, because I know everyone's different, but like if a person who stammers is giving you eye contact, keep the eye contact, because a lot of people would kind of like look, because it's an uncomfortable thing, you know. Like, I think because I'm uncomfortable sometimes when I'm stammering and I'm keeping eye contact with someone, because I'm, you know, it's just and even I'm not afraid to admit that there's a weird kind of like feeling. But basically, if you're talking with someone who stammers and they're keeping eye contact with you, keep on contact with them. Don't look away, look at your watch, go off and like, you know, move away from them. Despite the feeling of kind of discomfort, is that like it's a very discouraging thing for a person who stammers, because you're like, I'm trying to talk to you, but you clearly aren't too interested in what I'm saying, because yes, you are being patient, and yes, you are listening, but like you're not giving me your full attention. That's kind of all I can think of for pet peeves at the moment.
I think there are loads, Bevin, because like I think they're really practical. While we're looking at the negative here with the pet peeves, I think they're really practical things for people to be aware of, because again, just linking back to like the purpose of this podcast is we're looking at, say, school practices and teaching practices that may be limiting, you know, or restricting for children, staff, anybody really in that educational space. But it's interesting because you might have the most inclusive school, you might have the best teachers that have the best intention and, you know, are trying to be as supportive. And, you know, as you said, you had no experience of that deliberate exclusion. So listening to those pet peeves are very, very simple. And I think even it's so powerful being able to be aware of that, because simply interrupting someone, you're now telling them that their voice is not important, that you don't have the time to listen to them. And then your second one was, you know,
finishing
sentences. But exactly, but this is the point. What you've just exactly what I was going to say. Sometimes it's human nature to engage in finishing sentences or interrupting people, or like that, breaking eye contact, because eventually it gets to a point of, okay, I'm feeling a bit awkward, I want to move on. So I'm just thinking of those educators who, you know, maybe doing everything they think is most important, but it mightn't be so systematic. It mightn't be like classroom level. It may be as simple as, I'm going to make sure I'm present when they talk. I'm going to make sure that I maintain eye contact so they know I'm paying them with my full attention. Yeah. I will ensure that if they take longer to get to the point that they want to get, I'm not going to interject with a question of, what are you trying to say? Hurry up, or I'm busy. You're going to just give them the space. And I also think it's important being able to assess that boundary for people on the receiving end, being able to say, you know, I'm just thinking in terms of children in general with, you know, expressing their voice, that being able to say, if you don't have the time to be able to listen to someone, let them know, but also be able to say to them, but come and talk to me in 15 minutes when this is done, so that they know that they're not going to be dismissed entirely. They know that, okay, and they become aware of other people's boundaries, you know, because you don't want to get into the space of overexerting yourself in terms of, you know, extending yourself too far, that you actually don't even meet your own needs or your own, you know, level of energy. You know, you can exhaust yourself trying to meet the needs of everybody and anything, as we know anyway in our work. Yeah. So I think that's another great extension just of your pet peeves that you've highlighted, is just the normalcy around interacting and communicating. And it comes down to very basic understanding of communication and how normal it can be to miss, you know, the opportunity to stop talking and even think of feelings. Like if I wanted to say something to you and I'm really, really excited and I've thought about it in the middle of your story, you know, it's trying to navigate that, where I'm like, but I'm really excited, and if I don't tell you now, I'm going to forget. But then on your side, you're feeling like, but if I don't get this point across, I mightn't be able to say it because I have to move on after this. I have to do something else and move on to a different task. So I think they're brilliant points, Bevin, for just listeners in general to be able to hear, because it's really highlighting the basics of communication. need to be there for people, whether you're talking to a child, a child with a disability, an adult, a parent, whoever you're talking to. It's being able to maintain those basic 3 things that you've hit on: eye contact, being present in the moment, and not interrupting. It's funny because I know my partner is going to be hearing this and thinking, well, can you apply what you talk about? But that's my point. It can be very hard to do in the moment. And I think it's very much trying to generate the awareness of those 3 points you've highlighted, and being able to remind yourself of those as you go on. So no, they're amazing points, Bev. And I think they're going to be so helpful for listeners in any context, essentially. So we're just winding down now in the conversation, Bevin. Is there anything that you want listeners to know about, or anything that you want to kind of have as your key point for listeners to be able to advocate for the piece of work that you do?
Yeah, I suppose yes, but I have one more thing to say on what you were saying.
Please.
Was that I think this is something that I've had a conversation with a few people about, is that people are worried they're not doing the right thing. And I think in the sense that if you're talking to someone who stammers and you interrupt them and you go, oh, I shouldn't have done that, I'm the worst person ever. It's well, everyone, no one's perfect. And I think people who stammer have a lot of awareness that no one's perfect, as long as like you said, you give them attention, don't interrupt them, and give eye contact. That's as much as people who stammer want. And it's okay to get it wrong sometimes, as long as you're aware that you are getting it wrong, in the sense that if you interrupt someone and then you go, oh, I'm not going to do that the next time, then that's kind of, that's all anyone can expect from you in that sense. So I just wanted to quickly say that as well.
No, and not quickly, because we're taking our time. That's the point. That is the idea. We are, and that's the thing. People can be quite quick to move on to the next topic. So no, do pull it back in, because that's what we're talking about. We want to be able to talk about, well, what does respecting voice look like? And I think it's recognizing, like you just highlighted there, it's the mistakes in the moment. And maybe it's not essentially even saying it in the moment. I can imagine for some people, especially if it's just a socially awkward interaction, you mightn't want to say right there and then, oh no, I shouldn't have done this, and I'll make sure the next time I do this. But it might just be like a mental check for yourself to go, I think next time I'll do it a better way, or I'll try it a different way. And also it can be, like you said, talking directly to the person, just asking, just asking what works for you. But I am also thinking of your scenario of teacher and parent and child talking about what's the best approach. I'm also thinking of, if I was an educator and I was put in a situation where I needed to not address, but you know what I mean, talk about a child's stammer in such a formal manner, in kind of a, right, let's have a discussion, I would feel very awkward, because I would be thinking, I don't want the child to feel like I'm putting them on the spot, or highlighting their difference to the point that they feel uncomfortable. But then it's also recognizing, am I doing that because I feel uncomfortable? So it's a strange dynamic to try and navigate. But I would also, building on your example of having the direct conversations about it, is just sticking to those key communicators, those 3 key behaviors, and then maybe building from them. Maybe you do have people who aren't comfortable with direct eye contact all the time, as you are, but maybe being able to navigate it, that you recognize over time, okay, they seem to, react this way when I hold eye contact. Let's see if I hold less eye contact, does it have a different impact? And just working with the child, working with the person that you're working with in general, just to make sure that they feel respected and they feel heard. Fabulous points.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, what was your last question, or the one
last
before?
Question? Yeah. last question. It's just to maybe have a kind of a final point of, with your advocacy, where do you want to bring it? Do you have any final words of wisdom for listeners? What would you like listeners to be able to kind of take away from listening to your life experience?
Well, it's that kind of simple message, and I have it kind of on my Instagram and I have it on my blog, is that, like, you know, whether you're a person who stammers or you're not, it's like your words are worth waiting for in any situation. So that's kind of the message I'd like to send out. It's that, like, regardless of, you know, if maybe you don't stammer, but you need a couple of extra seconds to kind of figure out what your sentence is going to be, or, like, you know, you have it, you're basically, or you could just be like learning a new language, is that, like, it might not be perfect, but your words are still worth waiting for, regardless of how they sound or how they come out. In terms of advocacy work, I'm not entirely sure where I see that going. I think one thing is that, like, advocacy is something I try to do, like, every day, you know, like talking about stammering with people, or not even like stammering, we're just talking about, like, being different with people, and how, like, not everyone's the same, and that's okay, and kind of all that stuff. Yeah, I don't know, but yeah, I'm kind of, I don't have a definite answer for that yet, but what I will say is that I am really enjoying having these having these types of conversations with people, and I think, like, teaching people about stammering as well is, like, really important to me, because another fun fact, God, I'm like full of fun facts today.
Give it. Love that.
Another fun fact is that only 1% of the population in the world stammer, and from out of every 5 people, four boys will stammer, and 1 girl will stammer. So that's actually the last thing I'll say, is that.
And that's interesting, actually, because you just highlighted about the gender kind of aspect of it as well, to be aware of. So I nearly feel like we have to bring you on for another episode, because I know the fact that you have such open-ended advocacy, you can just take on the world. Like, you don't have a set plan, which is actually going to make it so much more impactful. So I do want to wind down, unfortunately, as much as I want to just keep this going, but we will have to invite you again when you're on your book and your tour and your podcast and your...
I would love that.
It was absolutely wonderful to talk to you, as always. Thank you so much for your lived experience. Thank you so much for your messaging. And I know that there's so much that people can take from this. So thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thanks, Chloe. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Talk to you soon.